Breakfast for one at 9, please. Green figs, yogurt, coffee, very black. Thank you.
Look surprised to see me. I thought you were expecting me.
So you are Titania Romanova.
My friends call me Tanya.
Mine call me James Bond. Well, now that we've been properly introduced.
Guns upset me.
Sorry. You see, I'm a bit upset myself.
Just like your photograph.
You look even better than yours. Much, much better. In fact, you're one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen.
Thank you. But I think my mouth is too big.
It's just the right size. For me, that is. Is it here?
What?
The decoding machine? The lector?
Oh, must we talk about that now?
Is it at the Russian consulate? Can you get me a plan of the consulate?
Why don't we talk about that later?
What are you looking for?
Scar.
What?
You see, I know all about you from your file.
I hope you're not disappointed.
I will tell you. In the morning.
In the early 80s, I got a call from Cubby Broccoli with an invitation to come over to London and test for the next Bond film, Octopussy. Well, the only thing I did, it's funny, I in my whole career, I never got too excited about anything. I would just go, okay, here's what I've got to do. And what I had not been contacted, let's say, by their wardrobe department, which is usually when you do something, that's the first thing. That's the first call that you get. And so what I did is I went down to the best shops around and got the 3 suits that Bond would, and I spent much more than I normally would have. And it was kind of an excuse to buy myself a present. So I arrived there very well dressed in London. And naturally they said, have you got any of your own clothes we can use in this? Even though there was a lot of money spent on the test. It was done the old way with a wonderful DP and beautiful sets and great line. You know, it took all day. Or actually, I believe it took 2 or 3 days to do the 2 or 3 scenes. And Vijay Amatraj was testing. Always had been amazed the high quality in those days of films that came out of England. I mean, really high quality. And yet I got to the studios, and the studios were not as, let's say, lavish as our old studios, even still are here, the few that are left. So I thought, how is this going to be? And was really amazed at how thorough every department was. I had, from the time I was 15, all I wanted to do was run a camera and be a director. And it was at 20 that somehow I got introduced to this head of casting at 20th Century Fox. And it wasn't within a half hour of sitting with him, he said, we want to put you under contract for 7 years as an actor. And I'm going, gee, well, at least I'm inside the gates. I get in here, I'll change jobs. Not a problem. That's not something that's done very easy. And it wasn't until the actually the early 80s, about the year, right after I did the Bond test, that I directed my first television and finally got back to doing what I've really, really loved in the first place. Cubby, you know, he took me under his wing and he told me the truth about it. He said if he was going to cast an American, he was very worried about whether to try an accent or not. But his intuition told him that it would be fine without an accent, and we probably would do the test with no attempt at an accent. We went to a lot of Cubby's clubs. We went to his favorite dinner place. He gave me a haircut. I started working out with the stuntmen. We were running around town looking at flats to choose because this was going to be my new home for a year. And it was quite a couple of weeks. I actually could not believe the amount of attention I was getting from Cubby, just going back to him. You know, in other projects, you know, people spend time with you and they go to lunch. I mean, we were in the car going out to the country. We were going into offices and meeting friends of his, and that was one of the wonderful things, just to be with a great guy who really seemed to care about what he's doing, whether it was business. His business was his life was his business was his love, and I was part of that, and that was kind of the best part of the whole thing.
By the release of For Your Eyes Only, the 007 adventures have become the highest-grossing movie series of all time. But in 1982, as pre-production begins on the 13th 007 adventure, it is announced that Sean Connery will star in a rival James Bond film. In light of this competition, the question for the producers now is, will 13 be an unlucky number for 007? In the fall of 1981, work begins in Los Angeles on the script for the 13th Bond adventure, Octopussy. George MacDonald Fraser is hired to develop the story.
George MacDonald Fraser is a novelist who wrote the Flashman series, is famous for that.
I suppose our minds went towards George when, you know, we decided that we'd try shooting in India, somewhere we hadn't been before.
He's also a historian.
Eventually, we got a script together.
He wrote some of it, and then Dick and I came on and wrote after he did.
Having decided to set the new Bond adventure in India, the filmmakers begin location scouting.
Having looked at Jaipur and everything that was of interest there, we then made a trip to Udaipur.
When we got to Udaipur, we found that, in fact, all the locations we needed we were able to find within a sort of 10 or 15-minute drive of the hotel in the center of Udaipur. I mean, it was the most extraordinary piece of luck.
India is such a big and vast place, and transportation's so difficult that it's good to find a location that'll fit all of your requirements.
It was obvious that within an hour of being there that this was the place that George MacDonald Fraser had written about. There was the floating palace on the lake.
Peter Lamont and myself immediately got our heads together and we thought that we could make that into Octopussy's palace.
At that time, the Maharana, who is like the king of kings, he's above a Maharaja, he was just converting part of his palace into it was called the Shivnivas Palace Hotel.
Very sumptuous suites. They're really for people on special holidays.
A lot of the main unit members stayed there, and I was the very first guest. And I think I was the first one to check out as well.
In the coming months, Lamont makes many trips back and forth from England to India. One almost proves to be his last.
There was a message from the radio. It said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're being hijacked to Lahore."
And they sat in the heat on the tarmac for about 12 hours before it was resolved.
I remember sitting next to this fellow, and he said, "What do you do?" So I said, "I work for James Bond." He said, "Haven't you got any of those gadgets with you?"
The flight crew overcame the hijacker.
And the captain put his arm around the back of the cabin door into the cockpit, grabbed the fire axe and smashed this fellow over the head. And as he kind of fell out the door, he kind of grabbed hold of the frame and got his pistol ready to fire, and of course just lost his balance and fell out. And then there was a rat-a-tat of machine guns outside, and everybody just fell to the floor.
It was very worrying because we didn't feel it was a good idea for them to deprive us of our production designer.
The filmmakers also face being deprived of their James Bond. By the 1980s, Roger Moore's multi-picture contract has expired. Now his deals are negotiated for one film only, with Moore always claiming that the current Bond will be his last.
It was like a continuing game between Cubby, Roger, and presumably MGM. All about negotiations, you know.
As pre-production on Octopussy commences, it seems that, indeed, For Your Eyes Only will be Moore's final Bond film.
There was a lot of doubt whether Roger was going to do it or not.
Other actors are tested for the role of James Bond, including Michael Billington, who had appeared in the pre-credits of The Spy Who Loved Me. Maud Adams is invited to Pinewood to screen test with another potential 007.
I was asked if I would go to London and do a screen test. And then I found out that Roger had not signed up for the next Bond, and they were considering somebody new.
Although he's an American, he's, sophisticated, kind of has a mid-Atlantic style about him.
One of the first roles cast is that of the Secret Service's man in India.
Cubby Broccoli was a great fan of tennis, and he used to come out and watch Wimbledon all the time.
Armitage is asked to come to Pinewood for a screen test.
In the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, well, I'm going to do this simply because who else will be able to say, well, they worked Pinewood in the morning and played Wimbledon in the afternoon.
But with Sean Connery set to do a rival Bond, the filmmakers take no chances.
It can be kind of confusing. You have two Bonds going at the same time.
There obviously were concerns.
At the last moment, Roger Moore signs for his 6th outing as 007.
Well, they've got a new young unknown actor called Roger Moore playing James Bond.
In the end, Cubby really instinctively didn't really want to use an American playing Bond.
But while Brolin fails to win a leading part in the film, Maud Adams is more fortunate.
I didn't really understand until the day of the screen test that they were serious about me playing Octopussy.
Of course, Maud Adams has the distinction of being the only leading lady to have appeared in 2 James Bond films.
Roger loved her, always thought she was one of his best leading ladies, and Cubby thought she was fantastic.
The things I've always said about Maud is always calm, always ready, very pleasant to work with.
As the production date nears, other key roles are cast.
Cubby was an old friend of Louis Jourdan, and they were socially very close.
Louis Jourdan, what a gentleman. Such elegance that he brought to the production.
He's a very suave man.
Cubby always loved the way Louis would say, Octopussy.
Octopussy. Octopussy.
A relative newcomer wins the role of Magda.
Christina Wayborn, I'd seen in a miniseries in America. She played Greta Garbo.
They'd also seen a poster that I had done with a Bengal tiger, sitting on a Bengal tiger in sort of a Bondish-looking safari outfit.
The part called for a very athletic person, and she was extremely athletic and beautiful and a good actress.
Once again, I got to play with a Swedish actress. It was really quite extraordinary that in both of the films that I did, I had Swedish co-stars.
Although she and Maud were both Swedish, she was a very good contrast.
It made a lot of fun for me, of course, because we had a lot of things in common and we could speak our Swedish when we didn't want anyone to hear us.
Indian actor Kabir Bedi is chosen for the role of Gobinda.
I played more the physical villain rather than the intellectual villain, the sort of jaws of Octopussy. Kabir Bedi came with a reputation because he was a big heartthrob in Italy.
Casting director Debbie McWilliams finds another actor with a reputation for the pivotal role of General Orloff.
Barbara had seen a play of mine called Greek in L.A., which was a huge hit in a small theater.
Stephen Burkoff arrived for his audition in a full samurai suit, looking absolutely extraordinary.
He's just a power to be reckoned with.
Stephen Burkoff, the most flamboyant actor, was a wonderful Russian villain.
He gave it all this energy.
Very talented man.
Production now begins in earnest on the film, whose title is a source of some controversy.
I did have some reservation about the name. I said, my God, that name as a title?
For a long time, people said, oh, you're doing the next James Bond movie. What's the name of it? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't think they've named it yet.
The lady interviewing me said, what is the title of the next Bond film? And I said, Octopussy. And she blushed, and she said, you have to be joking. And I said, why? What's wrong with Octopussy?
There was a great debate about whether it would be acceptable by the censor in America.
I mean, it was a name that Ian Fleming had given to one of his short stories, in actual fact.
When I realized that Octopussy really was the title of one of his short stories, then I sort of accepted the name Octopussy.
Once you get used to it, it's like, it's not so bad.
On August the 10th, 1982, cameras roll at Germany's Berlin Wall.
When we went to Berlin, it was at the height of the Cold War.
It was before the wall came down.
The whole time that we were filming, exactly like you saw in the newsreels, there were the East German guards with their binoculars looking down on what we were doing the whole time.
The East German guards were very puzzled over all this, and it created a lot of diplomatic flack.
There was no question of getting permission to actually go through Checkpoint Charlie with James Bond.
The skeleton crew only shoots for a few days, but 007 leaves his mark. The following week, the first unit begins shooting at Pinewood, where Lois Maxwell finds a surprise waiting.
They gave Miss Moneypenny a secretary for the first time. This is a very beautiful young girl, and obviously I'm going to be pushed out of the Bond films. I was a little, sort of annoyed, until I found that she was James Clavell's daughter, and her mother was April Stride, who had been a model with me in London when we were about 18. And I said, let me introduce you to my new assistant, Miss Penelope Smallbush. Whereupon Roger tossed the carnations. He said, my God, Moneypenny, I know where your mind is at.
The end of August finds the crew at RAF Northolt, filming the amazing pre-credits scene.
The Beady Jet sequence had previously been scheduled for Moonraker. We'd seen these Beady Jets, and it was a great idea, and Corky Thornoff, who was the pilot, he came over to London, and we had a chat about it.
It was a real plane, yes, it was absolutely amazing.
But getting the plane through the hangar requires some special effects magic.
It was built up with lots of models and stunts and foreground miniatures.
You can actually put an object in the foreground and make it merge with a building in the background so it appears to be part of that building.
We used a third scale door and a third scale model plane.
When the plane actually enters the garage, the door that's nearest to the camera is in fact a miniature and was placed about 4 or 5 feet from the camera to hide the existing door.
We had the hangar way over in the distance, the real hangar.
Between the foreground miniature and the building, there's probably 50, 60 yards.
We had a model on a line that we took through.
And it worked so well, we did the same thing when it exited from the hangar.
To film the jet inside the hangar requires another clever solution.
We put the actual Beady Jet on a car, just on a pole.
John, a very clever engineer, and he got a XJ6 Jaguar, and he stripped the top off the Jaguar.
One of my assistants in the back was working a hydraulic system to bank the plane from side to side.
We were able to actually put Roger Moore inside this thing and fly it through the hangar.
I was prayed that everybody else knew what they were doing, and they weren't like me. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just sitting there.
I would drive the car into the hangar at about 75 miles an hour.
The reason you don't see the pole arm and the Jaguar is because I put lots of figures in the foreground running back left and right to left.
We used the wing to hide the pole arm for the car, and as long as the camera was positioned cleverly with people and things in foreground, you'd never see the car.
They had trouble with the braking system.
And it took a few seconds to realise that the throttle on the car had jammed wide open, and were doing very graceful 360 pirouettes across the grass, straight towards one of Her Majesty's Air Force's planes.
John Richardson avoids an accident, but still must destroy the hangar in miniature.
It's probably only 12th scale, which is quite small. All of the corrugated metal sheets were made of plastic, but they were all stuck on individually, so they would come off individually. But each one was only, 4 inches long.
Meanwhile, another unit films aerial action for Octopussy's climax.
That was an incredible sequence. We shot most of it in the United States.
They wanted us to do a fight on top of an airplane, and we weren't sure this was even possible.
We built handles to hold on to, and we had hidden parachutes.
I came up with an idea that if we put a handle into the paint scheme, you wouldn't see the handle and it looked like the actors are just holding on to the side of the airplane. We had a door on the Twin Beach that could be removed in flight. And so we would always take off in a normal manner, pull the door inside, climb up on the aircraft, do our stunts, and then crawl back into the aircraft, shut the door, and land.
Back in England, the 1st and 2nd units combined forces to shoot scenes of Bond on Octopussy's train.
Up in the Nene Valley, there's a train museum that has, several miles of trains and tunnels. You get rolling stock that's from different countries.
It was a very, very difficult sequence to shoot. It was a beautiful place to be shooting, with all these palaces in the lake and boats and lights at night and camels and elephants and all the cows with their bells crossing the road. I mean, it was quintessential India.
Oh, India was magical for me. I never knew I was going to feel that way about it. It actually had such an impact on me for a long time after we left.
Roger and the other artist were staying at this superb hotel made of marble.
John Glen decided that the camera crew and myself should stay with him in some sort of farm.
One of the artists went home, and Tom Pevsner, there was a producer, said, would you like that room? He knew I wasn't too happy where we were staying. And so I went into this palatial room. This was sheer heaven. I'm going to become an actor next time I'm born into this world.
The Maharana rolls out the red carpet for the film crew.
He was very hospitable and entertained us royally.
Quite often we would be invited for dinner at the Marahanis.
He had pictures of himself with President John F. Kennedy and other dignitaries.
And he would serve us his own rose wine.
It was so delicate.
And it took some unbelievable amount of rose petals in order to make this wine.
But all is not wine and roses for the crew. On September the 22nd, they begin shooting the taxi chase. Local interest poses a problem.
Well, you were besieged by crowds in India. I mean, wall-to-wall people. We'd ask for 5,000 extras and 10,000 would turn up.
There is no way that you can control the public's access.
You can't sometimes see what you're filming for people. It's a big problem.
I was actually scared to go out on the street when they were doing that.
Things can get quite hairy. You never know what's happening. You can never, ever be sure a shot is going to be safe because you don't know which goat will run out of which alley at which point.
Suddenly, completely spontaneous and unrehearsed, a local on a bicycle went right between the swordplay and went through unscathed without even looking left or right. He thought conditions were normal.
The crowds are not the only thing that pose a challenge for Roger Moore.
Bond is not supposed to sweat. Bond's hair doesn't get untied. He's always in a dinner jacket. Everybody is wandering around in tennis shorts or swimming trunks. But Jim Bond is always out there with the tie, the smart suit. I was really more exhausted changing shirts, so he didn't look as though he was perspiring.
Martin was a really expert stuntman.
Unlike a lot of other train jobs that I've seen, the actual roof was convexed, which made it much more difficult from the point of view you didn't have a flat roof with railings on the side. Climbing down the side, climbing underneath the train, coming out and climbing back up again. I know the first day that the weather wasn't very good, so we didn't get a lot done. And the second day was the fatal day.
No matter how much one practices and how much you kind of go over the area, there's always something that can go wrong.
I was climbing along the side of the train, looking through the window. Had I been able to look forward, I would have seen whatever the obstacle was and pull in, or miss it.
They went up a track they'd never rehearsed on before.
And because the camera was still rolling and nobody had called cut, he entered the unexplored section of the railway line, still hanging outside the carriage.
I was in the helicopter at that time, shooting it from the air. Poor Martin, he misjudged the timing between places.
There was a concrete stanchion by the side of the track, which hit him in the thigh, took away most of the flesh from his thigh, and it cracked his hip, broke his leg, rib, and arm. And he still held on to the train.
It's a tribute to the man's strengths that he didn't fall off the train and fall under the wheels.
Martin survived it, but he spent 6 months in hospital.
Immediately, Cubby and I went to a hospital to see him.
We were very concerned. Martin had been a very good stuntman with us, and for a stuntman to get an injury like that could mean the end of his career.
Martin was very special.
And he had a wonderful spirit, and so I was very hurt to learn he'd shattered his hip.
Roger was at his side at all times.
Martin became very popular in the hospital with Roger Moore turning up to see him.
One of the calmest, quietest, bravest men I've ever come across.
He made a full recovery eventually, but it took a long time.
The accident has a profound effect upon Second Unit Director Arthur Wooster.
It upset me because I was there. I was looking at it through the camera, you know, and I very nearly stopped shooting Second Unit after that.
Back in India, news of the accident reaches the production.
We all heard about it.
That accident really hit us very badly.
As soon as the accident happened, I came back to try and sort out what had to be done.
I got a phone call to come and see if I would take over.
You have to pull yourself together, and you have to put that behind you.
The tension when I arrived on the set was quite strong.
Very hard on the Second Unit because they experienced that sort of tragedy.
People were worried about the sequence and whether we could, in fact, continue the sequence and get it all done safely.
You have to keep the morale of the crew up, and everyone, you know, is a great tradition in the filmmaking that, you know, you have to carry on no matter what.
There was a lot of soul-searching over that.
You know, the show must go on.
At the beginning of October, the unit in India begins shooting the tiger hunt sequence.
The whole thing comes from a short story, of course, called The Most Dangerous Game, where a fellow arrives on an island and he's told by his host that they like to go hunting and he's the quarry.
The Maharani had a huge garden that had grown into disrepair. It was an absolutely fantastic place. So that was the setting of our elephant chase. We were invited to the Maharaja's palace for a cocktail party. And as I came in the door, the first thing I noticed was a stuffed tiger. I said to the Maharaja, "Do you think I could borrow your tiger?" So we mounted the tiger on a wheelbarrow and charged through the bushes with it.
They got this snake charmer down from the hills, and you had to have like 4 interpreters to talk to him. John Glen kept saying, "Is it poisonous? Does it have its teeth in?" No one knew whether this thing that was hovering out of the basket had its fangs and had its poison. And he put it round my shoulders. I was wetting myself with fear.
I kept asking the guy who was in charge of the snake charmer, "So you've taken the poison out of the snake?" And the guy says, "Well, yes and no. We've taken most of it out. We've got to leave a little bit in so that the snake will survive." I said, "Yeah, what is this?"
I don't think Vijay was very comfortable with a cobra.
The thing is right in front of me, you know, it's like 2 feet from me. And what happens if he... Well, if he hits you, you know, the poison will come across.
Because these snakes were always getting out of the basket and running all over the place. So I didn't like snakes particularly, but we all found ourselves picking these snakes up and putting them back in the basket.
To be able to pick it up and put it in the basket and have the thing running all over, I don't think I could have done it unless the adrenaline was really pumping.
The cast and crew get a special treat when Martin Grace returns to the set. In November, the Pinewood Studios backlot becomes home base for Octopussy's circus.
We got a whole crew of kids in, entertained them with clowns and everything.
The big tent scene was coordinated by Barbara Broccoli. That was really quite remarkable how well she did that.
We had close to a 800 crowd, I think.
The atmosphere was genuine. We were in a tent and we had all this crowd there, and we did have the performance going on at all times, so it was quite festive.
Roger had some reservations about, you know, putting the red nose on and all that stuff. And I said, "Oh, no, it's a great... I mean, it is a great disguise, isn't it?" We had quite a serious discussion about it, and I said, "No, it'll be great."
They certainly had great fun romping around in that clown costume.
In December, scenes in Octopussy's palace are filmed. The sequence features a unique weapon.
The yo-yo was actually an idea that George MacDonald Fraser had.
It presented more than a few problems because, I mean, it had to do all sorts of things. We had a yo-yo saw that was balanced and sort of, you know, practical. And we had one that was on the end of a pole arm that would actually whir around with a motor drive on it so that it would, you know, seriously cut through things.
They're almost inventors, you know, they're almost worse than Q.
The filmmakers overcome the accidents and setbacks to create a rousing James Bond adventure. Upon its release in 1983, Octopussy becomes a record-breaking hit.
We outgrossed the other Bond film, which was satisfying to some degree.
Even to this day, as I travel the world, you know, people will say, "Yes, you play tennis, but the most important thing is you were in a Bond film."
We all work in cinema to leave some kind of enduring mark. And being in a Bond film is certainly one of them. I'm proud to have been in a Bond film.